The Coalition Council chamber was a vast circular hall suspended in the void above the neutral world of Virelis. Within its translucent walls, representatives of 73 advanced civilizations sat in stunned silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering holodisplay at the center of the room. The Voracine swarm had breached the outer colonies of the Coalition's territory, and the devastation was absolute. Entire planetary ecosystems had been stripped bare, their resources siphoned into the ever-growing fleet of the Voracine warships. The once unified front of the Coalition now teetered on the edge of collapse, their greatest minds paralyzed by the sheer scale of the threat. Grand Envoy Virex of the Thalrian Concordia, a towering being of crystalline exoskeleton and fluidic internal organs, slammed his heavy appendage against the table. "This is beyond absurd," he hissed, his voice reverberating through the universal translators embedded in every delegate's ear. 13 millennia of peace, and now we stand on the precipice of annihilation. His words carried the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience, but they were met with little more than murmurs of agreement. Across from him, Ambassador Lysara of the Yalari Dominion shifted uneasily in her hover throne. Her species, known for their telepathic unity, had never encountered an enemy they could not reason with. The Voracine, however, were not bound by conventional intelligence or diplomacy. They were a self-replicating force, consuming all matter, organic or inorganic, into their endless cycle of expansion. Their ships, monstrous constructs of biomechanical design, moved with an eerie synchronicity, their patterns dictated by an unknown central intelligence. "We have lost 83% of our fleet," Lysara finally spoke, her voice laced with sorrow. "Our remaining vessels are regrouping at Senster Nexus, but simulations give us less than a 17% chance of stopping the main swarm." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the chamber. The Yalari had always been the most optimistic of the Coalition, their ability to foresee potential outcomes making them invaluable strategists. If their projections were so dire, then the battle was already lost. Envoy Korthan of the Auric Mercantile League, draped in his elaborate golden robes, scoffed. "And yet we sit here, debating like frightened hatchlings. We have tried diplomacy, failed. We have tried containment, failed. We have tried brute force, failed. What remains?" His words, though blunt, carried the truth that none dared to speak aloud. Ambassador Dravek of the Draconar Ascendancy, his reptilian form coiled tightly in his seat, interjected. "Then we must find a new solution. We cannot surrender to inevitability." His voice was sharp, but his posture betrayed his doubt. Silence settled over the chamber once more, the weight of impending doom pressing down on every delegate. The Coalition had always prided itself on its unity, its ability to overcome challenges through collective wisdom. Now, however, that wisdom had led them to a dead end. The Voracine were unstoppable, until a voice, quiet but firm, broke through the despair. "There is one option we have not yet considered," murmured Ambassador Ekna of the ancient Vurian species, her elongated form barely moving as she spoke. "Perhaps we should seek help elsewhere." The chamber erupted into chaos. The chamber's uproar was immediate. Delegates from every species shouted over one another, their voices filtered through translation devices that struggled to keep pace with the rising panic. Some demanded more time for simulations, others suggested desperate retreats into uncharted space. But Ambassador Ekna's words lingered in the air like a whisper in a storm, and eventually, the noise subsided. "Explain," Grand Envoy Virex said, his crystalline form pulsing with curiosity. Ambassador Ekna's translucent eyes, milky with age, focused on the central table. "We have exhausted every known strategy. The Voracine consume everything, yet we have not considered the one species we once deemed too dangerous to integrate into our alliance, the humans." A second wave of protests surged through the chamber. Envoy Korthan's golden robes flared as he leapt to his feet. "You cannot be serious. The humans were quarantined 2 centuries ago for a reason. They are unpredictable, volatile, and prone to self-destruction. If we unleash them now, we may trade one catastrophe for another." Ambassador Lysara, her telepathic senses attuned to the emotions of those around her, countered. and yet they have survived where others have fallen. Their history is one of chaos, but also of resilience. They have faced extinction more than once and emerged stronger. Perhaps it is time we reconsidered our judgment of them. Envoy Virex, his crystalline limbs shifting in thought, studied the holodisplay. We have never engaged them directly. Our knowledge of their capabilities is outdated. I can provide insight. A voice spoke from the far end of the chamber. It was Traxian, a lesser-ranking diplomat from the Etherian Collective, whose role in the coalition had been limited to compiling historical records. He hesitated before continuing, knowing that the next words might define the fate of the galaxy. I have studied their archives, limited as they are. Their species has a history of rapid technological advancement, from discovering combustion engines to achieving interstellar travel in a fraction of the time it took most of us. They are not bound by tradition, nor do they fear unconventional tactics. Envoy Corthan scoffed. That is precisely the problem. They are not bound by reason either. They wage war over ideology, over resources, over pride. They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. Do you truly believe they would fight for us? Or would they simply turn their chaos loose on the Voracine, and us alike? Ambassador Lysara's voice was calm but firm. We do not have the luxury of certainty. We have seen that conventional strategies fail against the Voracine. Perhaps we need an unconventional ally. Envoy Virex exhaled slowly, his internal fluids shifting with the weight of the decision. If we take this risk, we must do so carefully. We will send a delegation to their world, not to Earth itself, but to one of their outer colonies. We must observe, assess, and determine if they are truly our salvation or our doom. The senior arbiter of the coalition nodded solemnly. Then let it be done. Traxian, you will accompany the delegation. Your knowledge of human history may prove useful in gauging their intent. Traxian swallowed hard. He had spent years cataloging the human species from afar, never imagining he would be sent to make direct contact. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had seen their wars, their ingenuity, their capacity for both destruction and creation. But now, the question was not whether they were dangerous, it was whether they were dangerous enough to save the galaxy. Traxian had barely begun digesting the weight of his assignment when the delegation's vessel arrived at the edge of the Solace system, the human world's designated quarantine zone. The warning beacons, ancient relics of the Coalition's decision to isolate Earth, still pulsed with their coded deterrent. But the human fleet had already responded. Before the delegation could even transmit their arrival, a transmission crackled through the ship's comms. Greetings, Coalition delegation, the voice said, crisp and precise in Galactic standard. I am Director Mira Jones of the Solace Colonial Defense Force. We've been expecting you. The chamber aboard the delegation's ship was silent. Ambassador Kitsusan, the ranking official of the mission, clicked his mandibles in disbelief. They knew we were coming? Jonah's voice remained calm. We detected your vessel the moment it entered the system. We've known about the Coalition for nearly 100 years. Traxian felt a tremor in his limbs. The Coalition had believed the quarantine to be absolute. No contact, no transmissions, no interference. Yet the humans had not only observed them, but deciphered their encrypted signals, hacked their satellites, and monitored their research vessels. How long had they been watching? As the delegation's shuttle descended toward the Mars Nexus Citadel headquarters, Traxian found himself staring at the human world below. The sight was unlike anything he had seen in Coalition space. Structures built not with the precision of the Thaurian or the elegance of the Ilari, but with chaotic ingenuity. The landing bay was teeming with humans in various uniforms, their expressions ranging from curiosity to quiet amusement. Director Jones stood at the head of a sleek conference room, flanked by General Ivan Suzuki, Dr. Maya Beck, and Ambassador Jade Simpson. Welcome to Mars, she said, her lips curving in what Traxian had come to understand as a human expression of amusement. You'll forgive us for not rolling out the red carpet. We weren't sure if you'd be here to ask for help or to remind us that we're still under interstellar house arrest. Ambassador Kitsison's voice modulator conveyed his discomfort. Your species was quarantined for the safety of all. Jones chuckled. Funny how that works. We've respected your decision, even if we never agreed with it. But I assume you didn't come all this way to debate history. What do you need? Kitsison hesitated before launching into the Coalition's dire situation. The Voracine advance, the catastrophic losses, the impending doom. As he spoke, Traxian watched the humans closely. Unlike the Coalition, they did not react with fear or panic. Instead, they exchanged glances that seemed almost eager. When Kitsison finished, Jones nodded. So, you're asking us to fight an enemy that your combined forces couldn't stop, despite representing 73 civilizations. General Suzuki crossed his arms. And you quarantined us because you thought we were too violent and unpredictable? Dr. Beck smirked. Guess you really were afraid of us. Ambassador Simpson leaned forward. But if you're here, then you must believe we're worth the risk. Traxian realized the truth of it. The Coalition had no other options. And the humans, for all their chaos, had just been given the challenge they thrived on. The human fleet moved with an unsettling speed, their ships accelerating in unpredictable patterns that defied conventional space combat doctrine. Traxian watched from the observation deck of the Coalition flagship, Tidy Phoenix Dawn, as the human vessels scattered like a swarm of insects, darting in and out of the Voracine fleet's advance. The Coalition's military leaders had expected a structured formation, a coordinated assault that followed the established principles of fleet warfare. Instead, the humans had chosen something entirely different: chaos. Admiral Elena Reyes, the commander of the human forces, stood beside Traxian, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the impending carnage. Your people fight to win battles, she said, her eyes locked on the tactical display. We fight to survive extinction. That's the difference. Traxian wanted to argue, to demand that they follow a more predictable strategy. But before he could speak, the first phase of the human plan unfolded. Small, unassuming vessels, civilian mining ships retrofitted with experimental technology, began launching a series of high-yield quantum mines into seemingly empty space. The Voracine fleet, with its rigid formations and synchronized movements, passed through these zones without hesitation. What are they targeting? Traxian asked, his voice laced with confusion. Commander Felix Navarro, the human tactical officer, grinned. Their communication nodes. They don't use conventional signals. We had to figure out how they coordinate. Turns out they rely on quantum entanglement relays. We placed those mines where we predicted the nodes would be. The effect was immediate. The Voracine fleet, once a seamless entity, faltered. Their massive world ships hesitated, their harvester drones drifting out of formation. The Coalition's forces, still operating under standard military protocols, watched in stunned silence as the enemy's cohesion fractured. Phase 2 commenced with even greater audacity. Human cargo haulers, reinforced with electromagnetic containment fields, surged forward, deploying vast nets of energy that ensnared smaller Voracine vessels. The enemy ships, designed for consumption rather than combat, struggled against the unexpected tactic. As their molecular structures destabilized, human fabricators at the rear of the battlefield began repurposing the harvested remains, constructing weapons from the very matter the Voracine had once wielded against them. This is madness, High Commander Crix of the Zergan Pact muttered, his 5 eyes blinking in rapid succession. They are turning the battlefield into a factory. Ambassador Simpson, standing nearby, chuckled. That's the point. They don't just fight. They adapt. They see an enemy that consumes everything, and they ask, what if we consumed it first? The final phase was the most audacious. Human research vessels, unarmed by conventional standards, maneuvered past the chaos, their sleek forms weaving through the wreckage of shattered ships. They deployed modified genetic resequencers, devices designed not to destroy, but to disrupt. The Voracine, despite their mechanical appearance, operated on a hive-mind principle, their consciousness distributed across their fleet. The resequencers introduced an altered version of their own genetic code, triggering a cascading failure in their neural synchronization. Traxian watched in horror as the largest Voracine world ship, its hull a labyrinth of shifting organic metallic structures, began to consume its own fleet. Its harvester arms, once precise and efficient, turned on its allies, tearing into the very ships that had fought alongside it. Smaller Voracine vessels attempted to flee, but the electromagnetic containment fields held them in place, their energy siphoned into human warheads. "Their fleet is collapsing," Lasara of the Yolari Dominion whispered, her telepathic senses overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the enemy's mental patterns. "They're turning on themselves?" Admiral Reyes nodded. "They were built to expand, to consume, to replicate. We gave them something they weren't designed for: confusion. Now they're fighting against their own nature." The battle raged for another 6 hours, but the outcome had already been decided. The Coalition's losses, once projected at over 88%, had been reduced to less than 22%. The humans had not merely survived, they had rewritten the rules of warfare itself. As the last of the Voracine ships disintegrated under the weight of their own internal contradictions, Traxian found himself speechless. He had spent his life believing in the Coalition's superiority, in the wisdom of their strategies. Now, he realized, they had been fighting an enemy that had already evolved beyond their understanding. It had taken humanity's reckless ingenuity to shift the battlefield into something the Voracine could not process. The Coalition's military leaders gathered in the war room, their expressions a mixture of awe and trepidation. The humans had proven themselves not only capable, but terrifyingly effective. Yet the question remained, what would they do now that they had been accepted into the galactic fold? Traxian wandered the corridors of the Phoenix Dawn, his thoughts a tangled mess of disbelief and revelation. The battle had ended, the Voracine fleet shattered by a strategy that defied every known principle of warfare. And yet, as he replayed the events in his mind, he realized the true victory was not in the destruction of the enemy, but in the fundamental shift in understanding that the humans had forced upon the Coalition. He had spent his life believing that stability was the key to survival, that logic and careful deliberation were the foundations of any successful civilization. The Coalition had built its power on those principles, ensuring that every decision was weighed, every action measured. But the humans had no such constraints. They had not hesitated in the face of overwhelming odds. They had not waited for consensus before acting. Instead, they had embraced uncertainty, bending the battlefield to their will rather than conforming to its rules. Traxian found himself in a quiet observation deck, staring out at the remnants of the battle. Human engineers were already salvaging what they could, their hands moving with a speed and efficiency he had never seen before. He noticed Dr. Maya Beck, the human scientist who had led the genetic resequencing effort, watching the scene with an expression of grim satisfaction. "You did the impossible," Traxian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Beck turned to him, her gaze sharp. "We didn't do anything impossible. We just changed the question. The Coalition fought the Voracine like they were another fleet, another enemy that could be outmaneuvered or outgunned. But they weren't a fleet, they were a system. And systems can be disrupted." Traxian exhaled slowly. "You saw them not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a force to be reprogrammed." Beck nodded. "Exactly. We didn't win by brute force. We won by making them stop working together. We introduced contradictions into their logic, and they couldn't handle it. That's what makes humans dangerous, not because we're violent, but because we don't accept limitations." Traxian considered her words. The Coalition had feared humanity's unpredictability, their history of self-destruction. But in this battle, that very trait had been their salvation. The humans had not been bound by tradition, by the rigid expectations of warfare. They had improvised, adapted, and overwhelmed the Voracine with sheer force of imagination. And yet, the implications unsettled him. "If your species can do this, then what else are you capable of?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. Beck smiled, though there was something almost predatory in it. "That's the question, isn't it? The Coalition kept us locked away because they were afraid of what we might do. But now you've seen what happens when we're given a real enemy. We don't just fight, we rewrite the battlefield. We thrive in the impossible." Traxian looked out at the stars once more, his mind racing. The Coalition had spent centuries perfecting their understanding of the universe, believing that knowledge and structure were the keys to survival. But humanity had proven otherwise. They had survived not through order, but through chaos. Not through caution, but through reckless determination. And now, the galaxy had to decide what to do with them. The Coalition Council Chamber was no longer a place of despair. Where once the room had been filled with frantic arguments and grim projections, now there was a sense of cautious optimism. The battle at Senster Nexus had not only saved the Coalition's last stronghold, but had reshaped the very nature of warfare. The humans had not merely fought, they had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that unpredictability and adaptability could be more powerful than centuries of established military doctrine. Grand Envoy Virex stood in the middle of the Grand Chamber halls, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment, addressed the assembled delegates. For the first time in recorded history, we extend an official invitation to a species once deemed too volatile for galactic inclusion. The humans have demonstrated their capacity for strategic brilliance and their willingness to stand against annihilation. Therefore, I propose that the quarantine of the Solace system be lifted, and that Earth, Solace Prime, be granted formal membership in the Coalition. The chamber erupted in discussion, but this time, there were no outright refusals. Some delegates still expressed reservations, citing humanity's history of internal conflict and their tendency to act outside established protocols. Others, however, acknowledged that in a universe now threatened by an enemy that consumed entire civilizations without hesitation, the humans' unconventional methods might be the very thing that ensured survival. As the vote was cast, Traxian found himself watching the results unfold with an unfamiliar emotion. Hope. The motion passed, and the Coalition's diplomatic corps immediately began preparing for the next step, establishing formal relations with the human leadership. Traxian was once again chosen for the mission. This time, it was not because he was expendable, but because he had spent more time among the humans than any other Coalition diplomat. He had seen them in action, had spoken to their leaders, and had witnessed firsthand how they thrived in the face of catastrophe. The journey to Solace Prime was unlike any diplomatic mission he had ever undertaken. The human vessel that carried them was not a sleek diplomatic cruiser, but a repurposed warship that still bore the scars of battle. As they approached Earth, he saw the planet in its entirety. Blue oceans, swirling clouds, and the faint glow of orbital defense platforms. It was a world that had once been deemed too dangerous to contact, now the center of galactic diplomacy. The first official Coalition embassy was established in the capital city of New Avalon, a sprawling metropolis of towering structures and chaotic energy. Traxian found himself overwhelmed by the sheer density of human activity. Unlike the orderly corridors of Coalition diplomatic centers, this city pulsed with life, people moving in every direction, vehicles flying in intricate patterns, and voices speaking in 1,000 different dialects. Ambassador Jade Simpson, the human representative to the Coalition, met him at the embassy's entrance. "Welcome to Earth," he said with a smile. "We know you're not here just to admire the architecture." Traxian inclined his head. "You are correct. The Coalition seeks to understand your species beyond the battlefield. We wish to know what kind of future we can expect with humanity as an ally." Simpson chuckled. "That's the million-credit question, isn't it? We humans are complicated. We can be your greatest asset or your biggest headache. But one thing's for sure, we don't do things the way anyone expects." Traxian exhaled slowly. The Coalition had spent centuries fearing the unknown, seeking control in every diplomatic and military endeavor. Now, they had embraced a species that defied control, a civilization that thrived in the chaos they had always sought to suppress. The question remained, had they made the right choice? As Earth's city stretched before him, and the stars above whispered of a new galactic order, Traxian realized that the answer would unfold in the years to come. The quarantine was over, and humanity had entered the stage of galactic diplomacy. Whether they would bring peace or upheaval was uncertain. But one thing was clear, the galaxy would never be the same again.